is refuting claims without mentioning names and keeping things academic and not personal, because this is deen issues. It's nothing like this. So there's no need to bring up names and this and that. But there are people that even become hufad of the Quran and this, and they study this and they went into ilm kalam, and yet still they fall into the traps of the shaitan. So it is a very dangerous methodology to philosophize about the ghaib. Very dangerous. Barakallahu fikum. We got some new brothers on the panel. We got Abdulrahman. Welcome to the panel, ya akhi. Salam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tafadhal, ya akhi.
Yeah, barakallahu fik. Yeah, so I agree with a lot of what's being said. In fact, I wouldn't limit it to philosophy. I mean, in any field you get into, it requires certain like prerequisites, right? Like even what you're talking about right now in your critiquing of philosophy, that requires certain prerequisites. In your making certain claims about the legitimacy or non-legitimacy of studying philosophy, that requires certain credentials as well, and it requires certain background. So I don't think any reasonable person would disagree with that. But like as the brother just said, I mean, it's not really about memorizing the Quran, because you can memorize the Quran and still fall into these problems. The idea is having a solid grounding in aqidah and in your understanding of the Quran and Sunnah before you delve into something that might, that has certain aspects of it that could lead you astray. But I want to ask Brother Samir, because he went up on the stage when Mahir Amir was talking, and he asked him about Ibn Taymiyyah's usage of kalami arguments of the mutakallimin. And it seemed like Brother Samir's claim was that, in his conversations with other people, he tried to tell them that Ibn Taymiyyah only referenced kalami arguments in order to refute al-mutakallimin. And in Mahir Amin's response, he explicitly negated that. And he said Ibn Taymiyyah, he addressed, first of all, he said that the arguments that the mutakallimin use are broad and vast and diverse, and you can't just put them all in a single basket. I'm just paraphrasing very roughly. And he also said that Ibn Taymiyyah, he affirmed whatever was correct in the meanings of the arguments of the mutakallimin, and he rejected what was incorrect. And in fact, he added and said that Ibn Taymiyyah even criticized some of Ahlul Hadith for not accepting some of the arguments of the mutakallimin that were sound, and not just that, Quranic, like straight from the Quran in terms of the substance and the meaning. So that was Mahir Amir's response. And he even said that some of it can be even sourced with the falasifa. Because, see, the haqq is the haqq wherever the haqq is, right? So if, for example, Ahlul Sunnah, right, they and the brothers leaning to the Athari school, they say that about morality, they affirm tahsin and taqbih. For whoever knows this, they are similar in this to the Mu'tazila. Now, just because the Mu'tazila says something that's not exactly the same but similar to Ahlul Sunnah, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden this point needs to be thrown out the window. So, because it's about the substance and the meaning. So I'd like Brother Samir to elaborate on that, because Mahir Amir's response was quite straightforward and explicit, and it seems like a lot of what's being said here is still in opposition to that. Thank you.
Barakallahu fik. طيب, were you here from the beginning of the room?
No.
No problem. I mentioned a quotation from Shaykh al-Islam that the ilm al-kalam and in general, philosophy in general, he said that it's similar to bid'ah. He likened it to bid'ah, and he gave a parable. He said that if bid'ah was pure evil, people would never touch it, would never go near it. And if bid'ah was pure haqq, then it would automatically be from the kitab and sunnah, because anything which is haqq, absolute haqq in deen, then by necessity it exists in kalamullah or in the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The Prophet ﷺ says, مَا تَرَكْتُ أَمْرًا يُقَرِّبُكُم إِلَىٰ رَبِّكُم وَلَا يُدْخِلُكُم الْجَنَّةَ وَيُخْرِجُكُم مِنَ النَّارِ إِلَّا وَأَمَرْتُكُم بِهِ. He says, I did not leave a single thing that will bring you closer to Allah Azza wa Jal, enter you into Jannah, and take you away from Jahannam, except that I have commanded you with. Now, to equate this with ilm al-kalam and to use Shaykh al-Islam as a substantiation for this, then this would be dangerous, because Shaykh al-Islam himself, when he spoke about these arguments and these people, he says, and I quote, he says that the Anbiya and the Mursaleen, the prophets and the messengers, never commanded anybody to delve into this science. And he says if knowledge was fixed upon something like this, then it would become wajib. The minimum, if knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal was by necessity founded on or based on this, then this would have been at least wajib. If not wajib, he says it's going to be mustahab. If it's not wajib, it's going to be mustahab. He says if it's mustahab or wajib, then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam would have commanded it, would have made it shara'i, and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum would have narrated it. They would have said, now we have to go into ilm al-kalam. But to make things short, because I think you have more issues, more questions, did Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the prophets, or a Sahaba or a Salaf al-Salih use ilm al-kalam?
Okay, thank you. So just like Brother Mahir answered in the beginning, so the term ilm al-kalam is very it's quite vague, and it depends on in what context you use it. So, for example, you quoted you said that you quoted Ibn Taymiyyah saying that it is a bid'ah, and of course, so, I mean, Ibn Taymiyyah himself, he's a contextualist, so it's important to read him as a contextualist, because when he says here ilm al-kalam is a bid'ah, he means a particular thing in ilm al-kalam, of course, that we would agree is incorrect and is a bid'ah, which is the metaphysical and epistemic foundations that they rely on in order to basically make knowledge claims about Allah, right? So that of course is a bid'ah. However, Ibn Taymiyyah in other places, he praises Ahlul Kalam. He praises the Ash'ari, for example, for how they stood up against the Jahmiyyah and the Falasifa, and he praises them in other avenues of the deen that they benefited in. And he affirms, more importantly, he affirms some of their arguments that you would classify as a Kalami argument, right? So the point is not that it's not just to make a broad, general, sweeping statement that would, put an end to the discussion. That's not the point. Now, did the Sahaba engage in ilm al-kalam? No, of course. Of course, they didn't engage in ilm al-kalam in the bid'i way you're describing. Nor did they engage in refuting al-falasifa because they weren't around. Nor did they have to engage in re-expressing some of the terminologies in the Quran in different, more philosophical language, as Ibn Taymiyyah did, and as Ibn al-Qayyim affirmed. I just put a quote from him, because they weren't in that situation. Now, what do we need to take from the Sahaba and from the Salaf is the foundations upon which they build their Aqidah. So our Aqidah is from the Quran and Sunnah and from the Salaf. Now, does that mean that's it, that you can't engage in any further avenues of knowledge, and you can't explore arguments for the existence of God, and based on the Quran and Sunnah affirm what is correct of them and reject what is incorrect of them? No, that doesn't mean that. And here Ibn al-Qayyim, this is what I put in the chat, I don't think you saw it. Ibn al-Qayyim رحمه الله says: ما يدخل في باب الإخبار عنه سبحانه وتعالى أوسع مما يدخل في باب أسمائه وصفاته كالشيء والموجود والقائم بنفسه فإنه يخبر به عنه ولا يدخل في أسمائه الحسنى وصفاته العليا. انتهى. This is in بدائع الفوائد 1169. So here Ibn Taymiyyah, because I heard you mention earlier, but you can't call Allah this or say Allah is that. It's al-asma wa sifat is tawqifiyya. Of course, it's tawqifi. However, I mean, and let me just read the other quote, because it's related to how the asma and sifat are tawqifi. This is also from Ibn al-Qayyim: ما يطلق عليه من باب الأسماء والصفات توقيفي وما يطلق عليه من باب الإخبار لا يجب أن يكون توقيفيا فهذا فصل الخطاب في مسألة أسمائه. So here Ibn al-Qayyim is saying, yes, the asma and sifat, it must be explicitly referenced in the Quran and Sunnah, but the language you use to inform about Allah does not necessarily have to be tawqifi, but its meaning has to be correct. And even Ibn Taymiyyah affirmed this, like when we affirmed that the meaning of wajib al-wujud is sahih and has precedent in the Quran and Sunnah. So I don't think these sweeping generalizations are really beneficial. I think the main question that I came up for alongside this point I just made about Ibn al-Qayyim is that stance that you had, Brother Samir, because you, again, I did ask Brother Mahir Amir, assuming that Ibn Taymiyyah only used Kalami arguments in the context of negating them and never affirming them. Now that's unequivocally false, because he affirms whatever is correct in terms of the meaning among the Kalami content. And Mahir Amir, he actually emphasized on this several times. He even said it could be from the Falasifa, let alone the Mutakallimun, right? So I just, alongside the other points, if you could just elaborate on this point related to the discussion with Mahir Amir, that would be very beneficial. Barakallah fiqh.
Barakallah fiqh. No problem. I just wanted to give you a quotation from Shaykh al-Islam. I'm going to read it in Arabic, inshallah. I think you'll get it, and then if there's a need, we can translate it. Shaykh al-Islam says, concerning the Mutakallimin, he says: وإنما أهل الكلام المحدث في الإسلام من المعتزلة والجهمية ومن وافقهم في أصلهم التبس عليهم حدوث الأعيان المخلوقة بحدوث نوعها كما التبس عليهم قدم نوع كلام الله بقدم عين الكلمة وظنوا أن حدوث الأعيان لا يحصل إلا بحدوث النوع فالتزموا تعطيل الرب وتعجيزه في الأزل عن الكلام والفعال وسلبوه صفات الكمال فتسلطت عليهم السلف والآئمة وورثة الأنبياء بالتبديع والتضليل بل وبالتكفير وانفتح عليهم من الفلاسفة سد الدهرية بعد أن كان مبنيا بزبر الحديد فلا للإسلام نصروا ولا للكفار كسروا ولا بحبل الله اعتصموا ولا للكتاب والسنة اتبعوا بل فرقوا دينهم وكانوا شيعا واعتاضوا عن الشريعة الإلهية بما أحدثوا بآرائهم بدع.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think maybe we're speaking on different wavelengths here.
No, I want you to.
Okay, can I ask you a question about what you just read? Do you think that what you just read, does the word takfir was mentioned? Do you think that by this quote Ibn Taymiyyah is doing takfir of the mutakallimin bil mutlaq?
But I'm going to give you one better. Does Shaykh al-Islam make inkar on the ulama that made takfir of some of the Ash'ari?
No, but then that's some of the Ash'ari, of course. So right here, the question is context. What was said and for what reason and why was the takfir made? So
I'm going to make it easier. I'm going to make it easier just to put things into perspective. Al-Ash'ari don't have any weight when it comes to ilm al-kalam. What I mean by this is Al-Ash'ari are an offshoot of Al-Mu'tazila. Al-Mu'tazila, and this is Shaykh al-Islam, this is not me speaking. Shaykh al-Islam says Al-Ash'ari مخانيث المعتزلة. They are the she-males of the Mu'tazila. Al-Mu'tazila مخانيث الفلاسفة. يعني you cross a philosopher with a Muslim, you get a Mu'tazili. You cross a Mu'tazili with a Sunni, you get an Ash'ari. So even in the categorization and classification of Shaykh al-Islam, Al-Ash'ari are muqallidun. They are simply copying their Salaf, which are Al-Jahmiyyah and Al-Mu'tazila. They didn't bring anything new, by the way. All of the arguments, the speech, the bid'ah, the khurafat, 99% of it is from the Jahmiyyah. And this is why يعني المشايخ say the modern day Ash'ari they are just Jahmiyyah. That's all. يعني they're using the words Ash'ari, but they're not Ash'ari. The idea that Kalamullah is created, this came from the Jahmiyyah. The idea that Allah does not speak, this came from the Jahmiyyah. The idea that Allah is not above His throne, this came from the Jahmiyyah. All these bid'ah kufriyah, this kufr, it came from the Jahmiyyah. So there's no patents with the Ash'ari. But even if we go to the level of the Ash'ari, there are certain people that make takfir of certain Ash'ari. But Shaykh al-Islam did not make inkar. He did not say no, this is wrong. He simply avoided the issue because he does not believe that they are kuffar. He has a different take on the issue. فأشاعرة are not the main issue here. I'm more focused on علم الكلام and the source of علم الكلام, which is Greece. It's not even Muslims, it's kuffar. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, again, no, so nobody's going to disagree that takfir has been made of people within the circle of ilm al-kalam, but that's not really like even people who affiliate with ilm al-kalam itself as like Ash'ari and Mu'tazila wouldn't deny that, right? So the point is not whether there's anything wrong in what they say. I think from the beginning, from the point I started talking, I was very clear about being more careful in contextualizing what we're saying is incorrect and what we're saying is correct. So I was never saying that there is no wrong and there was no deviance, right? So that's not the point. And in other places, Ibn Taymiyyah, again, he praises many of the people from these firaq, right? So the point is, Ibn Taymiyyah himself, like he was like munsif in that sense. And back to the quote that you read, he was critiquing like dalil al-huduth al-kalami, which is a specific dalil, and that's exactly the point, specificity. So right, so if you're going to mention specific aspects of huduth that Ibn Taymiyyah negated, and he proposed alternatives, right? And say that that's backing up what you're saying in terms of generally throwing the substance of the content of kalam, just out the window altogether. That's not going to help you because there's specificity in the quotes you're referring to, and in other places, and I'm sure you're aware. I mean, I can read them if you want, where he affirms arguments and parts of arguments and meanings that they affirmed and praises them. And so the point is, my point isn't that there isn't anything wrong in what they say and he hasn't criticized them. The point is, as Sheikh Mahdi Amir clarified, that there is the sound that is in accordance with the Quran and Sunnah. In fact, the way Sheikh Mahdi described it is straight from the Quran and Sunnah, and actually a rejection of it is something that is condemnable. And there's the bid'ah. That's the point. So I guess in terms of substance, and you also mentioned the Greeks and the philosophy and stuff. Again, it's about the meaning. And like if the Greeks are going to, for example, affirm the existence of one God, and some other civilization is like an atheistic civilization, then that part of what the Greeks say, although of course it's not going to be the correct aqidah, but that part of that meaning is closer to us than the others. Just because it's from the Greeks, it doesn't mean all of a sudden it's satanic or something, right? So that's called the genetic fallacy, and that's something that Ahlus Sunnah do recognize, which is why I mentioned earlier that there is, for example, agreement with the Mu'tazila on certain points. So on many actually. That was the broader point I'm making, and maybe this will help clarify the issue. Are you saying that all kalami arguments with all their meanings and whatever is within them, like the subcategories, everything is just wrong? As in using it is haram, period. Is that what you're saying, or because maybe I'm misunderstanding you?
تمام. علم الكلام, when it comes to علم الكلام, the words of العلماء are very clear in علم الكلام. when it comes to علم الكلام as a knowledge, as a science, as a tool, what the ulama say about it is crystal clear. I don't think I need to repeat it, but for the sake of argument, Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, he was very explicit concerning علم الكلام. Not only that, but he said that my ruling on the people of Ahlul Kalam is that they are whipped and beaten with branches of palm trees and with shoes, and that they are paraded in the tribes and the gatherings of people and markets, and that it is announced upon their heads that this is the punishment of the one who leaves Al-Kitab and Sunnah and goes into Ilm al-Kalam. That's the first thing. So this is Kalam al-A'imma. This is Imam Shafi'i, with all due respect to everybody else. Same thing, Imam Ahmed says the same thing. The other A'imma, Salaf Salih, they all say this. So Ilm al-Kalam is a no-go. It's something that nobody has an issue knowing. I think we all agree on that. Some people will say that the arguments, the intellectual arguments, Hujjah al-Aqliyah, are the part that we're going to use now. No problem. Let's take that for the sake of argument. I'm asking a very simple question. Which argument of the arguments that people use today, the mutakallimun use, was used and utilized by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum and the first three generations?
Okay, barakallahu feek. But I mean, actually, the problem is, so you first of all you talk about Ibn Taymiyyah and you use him as an authority, and then right now when we're trying to talk about
by the way,
Ibn Taymiyyah
Abdulrahman,
said, you're telling me what did the Prophet use?
No, sorry, I remember something, because you said that the quote that I gave you was specifically speaking about the people that have an issue with kalamullah, verbal and literal kalam, and how the Quran is kalamullah, it's not makhluq, and the bid'ah of al-huduth. That's essentially what you're saying, yeah?
Yes, but I'm also saying that in the same person you quoted.
No problem. I'm going to come to that. Now, the quotation that I gave you, he was referring to Ahlul Kalam in general. He said the Jahmiyyah, Mu'tazila, wa man wafaqahum, so whoever comes after that, Ash'ari, Maturidiyya, Mu'tazila, they're all going into it. He's speaking about them. Now, if you're going to make a distinction, I want you to give me somebody who Shaykh al-Islam praised that does not believe in the Quran being makhluq, in Allah Azza wa Jal not being above his throne, does not make إثبات العلو, يعني which from the Ash'ari that Shaykh al-Islam spoke يعني in good terms of, does not believe in these aqaid.
No, I mean, it's so when we're talking about like al-ayan, right, the specific people, Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah, whether it's about the firqa or about a specific person, he praises him where praise is due, and he condemns him where condemnation is due. And in many places, you'll see that this is the way of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And that, for example, there are certain people in the middle of like you know in a bit of a gray zone when it comes to asma and sifat, and maybe there's some issues that you know they that are questionable, right? Like Nawawi is one of those names. Now you're not going to just completely throw Nawawi out the window, right?
No, he's not an Ash'ari, Abdulrahman.
He's not an Ash'ari. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there are issues and certain questions about some stances he has on Asma al Sifat, which is
لا,
the label
يعني,
doesn't really matter.
okay, just to be on point. And I'm referring to the people of Ahlul Kalam, the متكلمون from the Ash'ari. يعني you have the, you know them, يعني al-Ghazali, al-Amidi, يعني you know them. Which one of them did Shaykh al-Islam say that يعني now this guy is okay, we're going to use what he has, that does not believe in these aqaid kufriyah?
أخي, first of all, عقائد كفرية, I'd say it's عقائد بدعية, but then if it's كفرية, I mean all of these people will be kafir, right?
No, don't make that mistake. يعني عقيدة كفرية is okay. If somebody
fine,
says
it's okay. I get it. I understand. You're just using it. It's fine.
It's by the way, it's a Shara'i description.
Yeah.
If somebody says that the Quran is makhluq, this is kufr. There's no dispute in that.
Yeah, but the person himself.
Himself being a kafir, this is something else.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. Okay. But of course, I mean, there's other details. Like for example, you'll see like Sheikh Al-Thamin, for example, spoke about how so doing ta'wil of the yad as quwwah, for example. Well, that's not kufr. Why? Because the language can actually encompass it, even though it's wrong. However, doing what, for example, the Batiniyah do and doing double negation with it, that's kufr. So there's also a bit of they're not all in the same basket. But the point here is that I'm not discussing names. I'm discussing the substance of the arguments, because that's what we are concerned with in our circles today. Because you see, you're making claims about the validity of using certain arguments or not using them. Now, all I'm saying regarding the authorities you're bringing forward is that they had a more nuanced, comprehensive stance on the usage of philosophy in Aqidah, or in proving the existence of God and whatnot. Of course, it can't be used as a basis for your Aqidah, depending, of course, on how broad your understanding of philosophy is. But then it's not black and white in the way sometimes people make it seem. So the point isn't who those specific people are. The point is
forget the people.
Like you talked about.
If you remember, Abdulrahman, if you remember my question, I asked you which argument was used by the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, which is a fair question. Yani, forget the people, the proponents, the names, the argument itself, the substance, as you say. Which one of them?
For example, you've got Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, right? Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, if you're talking about the Salaf, he used certain arguments in his response to certain firaq, like the Jahmiyyah, that weren't used by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and weren't used by the Sahaba. Is Ahmad ibn Hanbal wrong? I mean, I don't understand.
No problem.
Now
can we get an example?
I'm getting to that part about the Prophet, okay. Right? Now, in terms of what the Prophet used as an argument. Now, obviously, I don't think you mean whether the Prophet used it in terms of like premise, conclusion, and then sat and had a debate. I mean, because obviously, if you want that would be a bit strange. But
it's not strange.
The meaning, right?
One second.
No.
It's not strange. Why? I'm going to explain this. This is the core of what we're discussing right now. Because when people say that this is now from the Kitab and Sunnah, and there's merit and there's foundation for this, we need to see this.
Okay, but then now we need to take the discussion a step back. So then now I think you need to like take back your usage of Ibn Taymiyyah as an authority, because then these questions are going to apply to him too. So why did Ibn Taymiyyah provide arguments? Why did Dalil al-Huduth that Ibn Taymiyyah put forward, for example, or Dalil al-Imkan, or al-Imkan bi shart al-Huduth that Ibn Taymiyyah discussed? Did the Prophet use that? So right now your criticism of me is going to apply to Ibn Taymiyyah. So I mean that's fine. However, I don't think that Ibn Taymiyyah is not authority for you anymore. Then is that what you're saying? Are you going to defer and just take back? I mean that's just strange. It's like okay.
No, don't worry.
So
Ibn Taymiyyah in his books of Aqidah, where did he use these arguments?
Ibn Taymiyyah, he used them all over his books. So I'm giving you an example.
You have to pay attention to my question. In his books of Aqidah.
That doesn't look. So right now, let's say I'm giving an argument, right? He mentioned the argument and affirmed it in a book that he didn't call a book of Aqidah, and that's why does that matter? The point is he affirmed this specific meaning and said this is correct.
Abdulrahman, this is very simple. We have a book that is written for the masses, and these are going to be the general books that are written by Shaykh al-Islam. Shaykh al-Islam has over 300 books. He has these books, and then he has books of refutation, rudud. The refutation books are not for the masses. They are for the firaq, ad-dalla, the kuffar or the mubtadi'ah only. They're not for the public masses of the Muslimin. And I think you know the difference. So I'm asking a fair question. In which book of Aqidah, where Ibn Taymiyyah is establishing Allah Azza wa Jal, the existence of Allah Azza wa Jal, these things, in which book does he use this?
No, I can't get that for you off the top of my head. But however, I'm just going to grant for you whatever you want me to grant. But then look, so all you're saying is that the Aqidah, your Aqidah, can't be based on these matters because, first of all, I mean, it's tawqifi according to the Quran and Sunnah. And second of all, it's not required for the masses. It's required for deviants. I might agree with you in one part, but then when you say it's only required for deviants, that's incorrect. So Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, he affirmed, and of course I agree wholeheartedly, that these arguments are not required for a rational person to assent to the belief in Allah and the truth of Islam. They're not required in the sense that there is a more obvious foundation. However, he said that not all people are alike. He was a pluralist about his epistemology. He said these meanings are correct and are beneficial and can be used by some, and some people require them, others don't. Now, does everybody who requires it, have to be a deviant by that label? Not necessarily. So it's just about the fitra being clouded, and maybe a specific person within a specific circle requires it expressed in that syllogistic manner. Now, did Ibn Taymiyyah critique the usefulness of the syllogism itself? Yes. But did he also use it? Yes, because he doesn't believe it's incorrect. He just doesn't believe it's foundational. But that's a different argument from you saying, as you've been saying in the whole room, that this is bid'ah stuff. You're saying it's incorrect. So there's a difference between saying it's secondary and saying it's incorrect. So if you're saying it's secondary, I will agree with you. But if you're saying it's incorrect, which you have been saying in the room, then that's just false. So that's the point.
No problem. Like, that was a long answer. It's a very simple question. In which kitab of Aqidah, Shaykh al-Islam,
in none
does
of
he
them.
use
None
this?
of them. None of them.
Like, now there's a reason for that. And this is very valid. What I said at the beginning is people misunderstand Shaykh al-Islam. Not only that, but they are using his name. And this is where the problem is. We have no issue. Shaykh al-Islam is an individual. He's a Muslim. That's all he is. He's a alim, alhamdulillah. May Allah reward him with Jannah al-Firdaus. May Allah Azza wa Jal make him with the Nabiyyin as-Siddiqeen for the service that he gave to al-Islam. But at the end of the day, he's a Muslim. To go ahead and use Shaykh al-Islam as a point of reference for now legitimizing something that the Salaf Salih prohibited, this is a problem. And the only reason we're discussing him is because we want to defend his honor. Because people now are using his name or abusing his name to show that he himself was a philosopher. He was from Ahlul Kalam. He had no problem with this. In fact, he used it. He advised to use it. There's nothing wrong with it. So essentially, he's going against each and every single statement of a Salaf Salih. And apparently he knew something that Shafi'i and Ahmad ibn Hanbal did not know, which doesn't make any sense. The simple Muslim will be questioning this. They'll say, hold on a second. This does not fit in. This does not work. And it's very simple. When you bring Shaykh al-Islam in his refutational works, targeting a specific people, and use it now to say that this is what the Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah was upon, this was his aqeedah, this was his deen, this is how he gave da'wah to Allah Azza wa Jal, this is a misrepresentation. And this is a disservice. And this is lack of integrity. And by the way, the very same lack of integrity is when people use dalil al-imkan, the contingency argument, to try and establish how the necessary existence is Allah Azza wa Jal. But when they reach a certain point, they will make a jump, and they will not inform the atheist in front of them that this whole argument does not necessarily prove Allah Azza wa Jal. It simply proves wajib al-wujud, necessary existence. This form of lack of integrity is prevalent in the proponents of philosophy. And this is why Ahlul Sunnah, they have a problem with this. Allah Azza wa Jal says that when you make a statement, when you give witness, when you give testimony, you have to say the truth, even if it's against yourself. And I say, this is my take, and this is not only me, there's a lot of ulama saying this. Shaykh al-Islam is madloom. He's been wrongfully accused of being a philosopher, while the poor man spent a lot of his life refuting these people and speaking against them. Not only that, but people will now actually go ahead and say, as you have said shortly before, that Shaykh al-Islam praised al-Ash'ari. So what are people going to take away now? That there's nothing wrong with al-Ash'ari. That somehow Shaykh al-Islam believes that al-Ash'ari from Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Khalas, it's problem solved. So all these books that he wrote and all these refutations, he had no reason for all this. He made a mistake. He shouldn't have done all this. This, I say, brothers and sisters, is not insaf. If you have to go with insaf, take philosophy, run with it, use it, but do not use the names of ulama Ahlul Sunnah. And please stop saying that Ibn Taymiyyah is the reason and justification, because wallahi, the usul that Ibn Taymiyyah was upon, the brothers and sisters, they're not upon, and we both know that. They do not agree with him in many things and in many issues. And his criticism, his very own criticism.
Actually, if you don't mind, just so I don't forget, because you've been going on for a while. If you can, yeah. So the problem is, so what you said towards the end, maybe it might be helpful. First of all, his usul were correct, and that's a requirement. Well, obviously, of course. So nobody's saying that if a Buddhist uses these arguments, he's upon the correct aqeedah. I mean, nobody thinks that, right? So that's first of all. Second of all, you see, a summary of what you said is that. A summary of part of it is that basically implicit in what you're saying is that Ibn Taymiyyah didn't make positive arguments and cases for the existence of God using some of these terminologies. He only used it to refute other deviant sects amongst the Muslims. Am I understanding you correctly?
Just real quick, Samuel, before you just actually 1 second, barakallahu feek. Another thing I just want to highlight the point that I think Abdulrahman would agree upon, because he said someone has to be firm upon the kitab and the sunnah before it might even be makruh for them to go into these fields. You agreed upon that point, right, Abdulrahman?
Of course, and that's the answer I give to anybody who asks me, for advice about studying philosophy. I mean,
barakallahu
I don't
feek. A little also the purpose of the room is also to reach out to the layman, because you agree upon the principle upon closing the door upon haram. And if there's a thing that can lead to zandaqa, kufr, and bid'ah, and these things, like you affirmed the kalam Sam quoted before, then it is especially for the layman that door becomes shut clean. It becomes haram for them to go into it. If they do not have a firmness upon kitab and sunnah, it is haram, because this can lead them outside the fold of Islam because of this philosophy. Because if they do not know the usul, they're going to grow into places where Islam does not, the fold of Islam does not cover anymore. So from that aspect, I think we all agree upon this. aspect at first and foremost about the layman. Now the question is for the student of knowledge, right? That have reached the prerequisites. And I think even there we agree, but even there some people might still slip into the haram. And my app is glitching very much now, so I'm going to restart the thing. Barakallahu fikum. But we just to make it clear to the people, we all agree upon this, yeah, Abdurrahman.
Yes, of course. I mean, you need, and again, of course, this is specifically, or especially important when it comes to aqeedah, because that's the most important thing. But this really applies to just common sense. It applies to any avenue of knowledge, right? There's certain prerequisites for you to get into certain areas, right? And now, when the matter concerns your dunya and your akhirah, and when this specific avenue is known for, many deviant opinions and a lot of speculative metaphysics that leads people astray and isn't clear in its method of reasoning and stuff like that, then of course it's even more of a reason for you to stay away from it if you don't have the necessary prerequisites. And this just applies to everybody. I mean, everybody thinks like this. Reasonable people think like this, whether they're Muslims or not, to be honest. So that's yeah. So we're in agreement there. Now, I think the question asked for this is important because if implicit in what he's saying, which is the crucial point really, that was said in the middle of what he said a while ago, is that Ibn Taymiyyah only used these arguments as a refutation of certain deviant sects. That's not true. So, I mean, I don't know if you want me to ask you the question, but maybe I could take both points together, because then you mentioned the contingency argument. People who use the contingency argument and don't honestly tell their interlocutors that this only takes you to a necessary being who is not necessarily Allah. This is like word for word. And I mean, in terms of substance, like paraphrase what Ibn Taymiyyah says about the argument. But then I want to ask Brother Samir if he knows what Ibn Taymiyyah goes on to say from that point onwards. He affirms the correctness, the soundness of the argument, Ibn Sina's argument. Let me just say it without asking questions. He affirms the soundness of Ibn Sina's argument, but says it's pointless because it just gives you this abstract necessity. That's obviously correct because of the structure of the way you presented it. And then he says it doesn't particularize and give and describe Allah by His sifat. So he's basically saying, well, there's more work to do, right? Of course it's a bit more complex than that, because it also has to do with how they see universals and stuff like that and abstract stuff. But put that aside. The point is Ibn Taymiyyah goes on from there and affirms meanings within the contingency argument and uses the concept of contingency, and in fact explicitly says that this meaning, and you know what, in fact I have it right here. He explicitly says وهذا ما صار به كثير من المتأخر الناظر مثل صاحب هذه العقيدة وأمثاله يقررون به إثبات العلم بالخالق فيثبتون أنه واجب الوجود. They affirm that he is the necessary existent. هو معنى صحيح, which is a correct meaning. So right now he's not doing this to respond to to a deviant and say, look, he's not a necessary being. He's using it to say, look, that's correct. But then in order for it to be upon sound reason, which is basically what the Quran and Sunnah is, you have to make these adjustments to it. And he goes on and makes the adjustments. That's the point. It's not that he's just so that's what, because I know you were trying to ask Sheikh Mahad about the contingency argument, and I know you had a discussion with Jake where he kept trying to specify what you mean by contingency argument, and that's the reason, because Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah himself, he makes adjustments to it that should already tell you that by the word contingency argument right now is going to be a bit ambiguous, because, well, you don't know which one you're referring to. There are formulations of specific arguments that lead you to a correct meaning and others that lead you to a false one. Now, when you're asking about the Prophet and the Sahaba, if they used it, I mean, there's an issue, of course, right? Where are you going to draw the line? I mean, are you going to say that we can't use any words that they didn't use? Then we're all in trouble then. We can't use it about Allah. Well, then Ibn al-Qayyim was wrong when he made that distinction between asma wa sifat and bab ma yukhbaru bihi anhu, right? Which is the latter being broader, as in you can form about him using the terminologies that aren't necessarily explicitly mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah as asma and sifat. Then we can keep going on. I mean, where are we going to draw the line? Well, where we draw the line is clear, and that's clear from the works of Ibn Taymiyyah. The clarity is what? The clarity is the meaning, the substance of what's being said, not the istilahi or linguistic expression of how it was said and in what tone it was said. That's not the point, or where a certain idea came from. The point is the meaning in accordance to the Quran and Sunnah? This is how Ahl Sunnah, they even answer questions. You watch Shaykh Uthaymeen, Shaykh Ibn Baz videos. Whenever they're answering questions about, is this meaning? Can I say this meaning about Allah? Or some firq say this. They don't just give you an answer. They don't just say, oh no, that's haram, that's bid'ah. No, they say, ماذا يقصد? What does he mean by this? If he means that, then he's wrong. If he means this, then he's correct. If he means that, we reject it. If he means this, we affirm it. They don't just make blanket statements. And in relation to that, because you said that I said, Sha'ira Ibn Taymiyyah praised them, and that's going to make people think blah, blah. No, I don't think that's accurate given the way the discussion went. I was very specific in putting it in a specific context and contextualizing it, in telling you that the blanket statements are wrong. Because just as you don't want people following certain sects in certain wrong beliefs, you don't want people wrongfully, making blanket statements and doing just outright tabdi' and takfir of Muslims without restriction. You want them to contextualize it, and you don't want people, even the layman, to just reject the good that comes from someone who may have some wrong aqaidi stances. That's the way of Ahl Sunnah. They even say that, well, they are among Ahl Sunnah in what they agreed with Ahl Sunnah in. And I mean, some of Ahl Ilm say this. So this is the way to look at it. And in fact, if you're concerned about the layman, this is the way to present it to the layman. Not in this just broad, sweeping generalization and put everybody in one basket and simplify things. I think the details and the nuance is very important.
يا سامر يا أخي. Well, yeah, so basically, the reason why the ulama use the broad statements, one of the reasons, for example,
I believe he had a problem with the connection. Continue, Ibrahim. Okay, sorry, but I have to leave. That's all time for me. Barakallah feek, Brother Samir, and Barakallah feek, Brother Ibrahim, and all of you.
Abdulrahman, wallahi, I was waiting just for Ibrahim to finish. I need to ask you a question if you don't mind.
Okay, please, just quickly, because I have family waiting.
Regarding the Ash'ara, what the scholar says about them.
Can you hear me?
I hear something about the Ash'ara.
Are you asking
Yeah,
what the
Abdulrahman,
scholars
can
say
you
about them?
Yeah, the last part when you was talking, the last part about the Ash'ara. Some of the scholars they say something about the Ash'ara. Can you just?
Yeah. Look, the whole point was for me not to make
Abdulrahman?
general statements, and I'm not really qualified anyway
Abdulrahman,
to make these statements. But the point is
can you hear
that
me?
they were specific, and they Brother Simon. Let me just answer his question very quickly, and then I'm gonna mute. I was just saying they're specific in praising what needs to be praised and condemning what needs to be condemned. Right now, that doesn't mean they weren't very harsh in their condemnation, but it means they were fair. Right, that was the point I was making. And as for like you want to give you some hukum that ulama say, I'm not really qualified to do that. So Brother Samir, you can say what you want to say because I need to leave.
I want to ask you a question because I was listening and my internet was going out. You mentioned the contingency argument. You mentioned the sifat of Allah Azza wa Jal. It's an honest question. No need to go into details. Does the contingency argument in both versions, Ibn Sina and Ibn Taymiyyah, does it arrive, in all honesty, at Allah Azza wa Jal with His sifat that we know about in the Quran al-Karim and the Sunnah?
Okay. That's a good question. So for Ibn Sina, we'll say no, of course, right? And now for the questions for Ibn Taymiyyah, what he says is, well, basically what we call in contemporary philosophical terms, he discusses stage 2 cosmological or contingency arguments, right? Where he says, well, we need to look at like the data, right? What the world is like, and infer the characteristics of the maker, right? So that's very simple. And the idea is, you have to like come to there. So there are sifat that are like khabariya that we won't know without scripture, right? So there are sifat that you can't use the aqli to come to. But does that mean that when the Quran, for example, tells you to reason and to ponder upon creation and the wonders of creation and infer the greatness of the Creator, is that informing you about every single sifa of Allah? No. So the question would still arise, like it would apply to you. So, well, in that kind of line of reasoning that the Quran basically praises, is it telling you about Allah? Well, yes, but I mean, the idea is that if I want to describe you, I'm not going to say every single detail about your life, right? So you describe certain aspects, and that might suffice in describing the person, of course. And here, when we infer certain attributes of God, well, that's where you're particularizing and you're saying what He's like. Does that mean that you're doing like hasr and you're just saying everything about God? I mean, do you need to say everything? Well, you can't, because there are sifat khabariyah that you couldn't know without a revelation, and there are sifat that we don't know about that weren't even revealed, right?
Abdurrahman, it's very simple. Give me the contingency argument that you believe is correct. The version that you think is correct. Just explain it in simple English.
So since you've been quoting Ibn Taymiyyah, so I'll just refer you to him. And basically, Ibn Taymiyyah talks about
leave Ibn Taymiyyah out of it. Just what you believe.
No, but you want simple English. So if you want me to, there's some terminologies I can use from like contemporary analytic philosophy. If I talk about possible worlds and modality, well, you're going to need to know the meaning of that to know whether it's okay or not, right?
My question is very simple. In simple English, I'm somebody who's never heard of the contingency argument. In a sentence or two, without going into any lengthy explanation, what essentially is the contingency argument?
In a sentence or two, that's quite a challenge, but okay, maybe I'm up for it. But let me just try to be very quick because I need to leave. So again, I think if you want simplicity, I'm going to refer to Ibn Taymiyyah because I think that's simplest. Ibn Taymiyyah has al-imkan bi shart al-huduth, meaning that something is possible, and from we as humans know that this is a possible being by the fact that it begins to exist, right? And a possible being is basically a being that doesn't have to exist. What that essentially means, if you want me to simplify it for you, is that in order for me to exist, something must make me exist. Basically, Allah must create me. As in, I am not sufficient for my own existence. I am insufficient, right? Allah is the only self-sufficient being. And what the contingency argument does is it moves from these possible beings, which basically require external factors to make them exist, and arrives at a self-sufficient necessary being. Now, what necessary being means is that he doesn't require anything external to him to make him exist. He's self-sufficient, and he exists by necessity of his own essence, right? And you'll find all these meanings in Ibn Taymiyyah, no issue whatsoever with any of these meanings. So that's the gist of it. Now, I don't know if I met the challenge, but there's a lot more to say, of course.
No, it's not a challenge. It's a simple discussion.
No, I met the challenge. From my side, it was challenging to do it in a sentence.
How many necessary beings are there in existence?
Yeah, you're asking a Muslim, man. I mean, the answer should really be obvious.
Don't answer me as a Muslim. Answer me as somebody who's into philosophy.
No, I never answer as not a Muslim. Well, what do you mean? There's one necessary being.
If you answer as a Muslim, let me explain. If you answer as a Muslim, then you believe in Allah Azza wa Jal, you believe in the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal, you believe that Allah is above His throne, you believe that Allah speaks. And these are things that philosophers certainly...
Stage, so when you arrive at the necessary being, that's what Ibn Taymiyyah says. You refer to creation and you refer his intelligence. He's the creator.
No problem. So the first stage, this is essentially the answer to my previous question. You do agree that the contingency argument on its own is incapable of establishing Allah Azza wa Jal?
That's a vague question, and I won't give it a yes no answer because I gave you the reason earlier. I'm not sure if you
It's
heard
a
me,
it's a
but
it's
I
a,
gave
it's
you.
a simple question,
Let me just
Abdulrahman.
repeat what
It's
I
a simple
said.
question.
It's not. So I respect the fact that you see it as a simple question, but let me explain to you why I don't think it is. Because right now, if I ask you right now, right, if I ask you like when the Quran tells you to ponder on creation, basically what we call like design arguments. When you tell people look around you, who made your who made your body, who made your faculties, who gave you these faculties, and all of that stuff.
Can you give an example?
You're basically, yes, I'm giving an example.
لا,
When
a
you're when
verse,
you're
an
when
ayah.
you're when إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات
إن في
لأولي الألباب,
خلق.
right? So,
One second,
yes,
one
yes,
second, one by one.
yes.
إن في خلق. Can you use the word خلق when talking to a philosopher?
What do you mean? I mean, creation. I've used it several
Can
times
you?
right now.
No, you know what I mean. Will a
I
philosopher?
use creation several.
No,
Would
one
you accept
second.
that creation is a translation? Is that correct?
It is a translation, but my question is, if you speak to a philosopher worth the name, will you be able to say creation, the word creation?
Actually, I'm afraid, Yani, right now I don't know what you mean. Okay, so creation right now. So right now you're focusing on the mustalah, right?
No,
The
this
point
is not a mustalah. This is a creed. This is a
one
belief
second.
foundation.
No, that's not my point. My point is that the mustalah within the philosophical circle, does it contain that meaning or not, is the point. And the reason for that is, well, I can ask you, are you going to use the Arabic word khalq? And you're going to be like, not necessarily, because creation gives him the meaning. Well, I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying that other word in that other philosophical language gives the meaning. So it's like, well, if it's not okay for me, then why was it okay for you to translate to English? You get what I'm saying?
Okay, let me explain. A philosopher will not entertain the mere idea of a creation, of a creator. He might discuss with you whether there's a necessary existence or not, and how the world came from nothing. But for you to make the jump and say that there is a creator out there who created the world, this is something philosophy will not accept, and you know that.
Okay, first of all, I don't really care what a person believes. I care about the muhtawa, the substance. Second of all, what do you mean by the philosopher will not? We are generalizing. Are you saying that there's no Muslim or Christian philosopher that believes in the concept of creation? Well, I mean, I don't understand. How do you
let me
understand
explain.
philosophy? Like,
I'm going to
okay,
explain. There's no Muslim philosopher. There's a mubtadi' philosopher. Muslim and philosophy, they don't go together. You either are a philosopher or a Muslim. A Muslim is somebody who deals with the world in revelation, wahi, Quran and Sunnah. A philosopher is somebody that will use his intellect, his reasoning, to delve into the unseen. And these two are not synonymous. That's why philosophy is haram. Philosophy, which is ilm al-kalam, the section of philosophy dealing with the ilahiyat, the things that are ghaybiyat, things that are beyond our knowledge, human knowledge, it is haram to delve into that with your head. You cannot use your head.
Sorry for interrupting. Wallahi, I don't like interrupting, but I'm in a rush. But now you're doing takhsis. See, you say a lot of stuff, and then you're doing takhsis. At the end, you're saying that part of philosophy that I would already agree with you in. But we were talking about the general term. It's vague. And I mean, I have a link to a discussion by one second. Let me just say this. I have a link to a discussion by Sheikh Mahdi if you want to watch it, where someone is saying the same thing. Right?
No, it's simpler. It's simpler than that. It's simpler than that. If you remember,
let me just give you the idea. I don't have a problem accepting your istilah. If for you use the word philosopher means idolatry, then okay, that's kufr. I agree, but that's not what I mean by philosophy.
Relax. Which philosopher? This is how it becomes simple. Which philosopher believes that Allah Azza wa Jal has hands, 2 hands, has feet, 2 feet, speaks with voice and letter, and is above his throne? Which philosopher, Muslim philosopher, believes in the things I just said?
Ibn Taymiyyah.
You know that you cannot call Ibn Taymiyyah a philosopher. I don't think even your Muslim Sunni brothers will accept that. To say that Ibn Taymiyyah is a philosopher.
So actually, that's the point. I told you I have.
That's extreme, يا عبد الرحمن. That's extreme. Maher Amir is not a hujjah, يا عبد الرحمن. يعني this is not how we speak about the ulama. You got to be careful. Okay, Ibn Taymiyyah aside, who else? Brothers, am I audible?
Yeah, yep.
Abdulrahman, I think your mic is off.
Houston, we have a problem.
First of all, I want to affirm a lot of what the brother's saying in terms of the kalam of Allah being superior, the kalam of Allah being the best way to express something. Us, being incapable of matching the kalam of Allah in any way, be it in a philosophical or non-philosophical discourse. In fact, actually, what you're expressing right now, in terms of sticking to what Allah says, Allah expresses better, but you're still expressing it, right? If you thought that what you were saying was superior to what is in the Quran, that would be kufr for anybody. I mean, let's go straight kufr, right? So let's just agree upon that. And Muhammad Hijab has this, that method. Yes, Muhammad Hijab is not a Nabi or a Malak, right? Muhammad Hijab makes mistakes, and I disagree with Muhammad Hijab on many of the way he uses arguments. The point here is that really, since we've been talking this whole while, in terms of substance, I don't see how you responded to to anything I said that would make it basically, that would favor the kind of stance that you're trying to put forward. Like, for example, what before my battery died, the istilah thing, right? You're saying philosophers, and you're arguing with me about whether a philosopher can be a Muslim. Well, you know that, la mashahat fil istilah, and of course, this maxim has its conditions. But then the whole point I was making was that it depends on what you mean by philosopher. Clearly, if you're going to define philosopher as someone who holds to kufri metaphysical principles, then who is going to disagree with you that no philosopher is a Muslim? The point is that the istilah, the usage of the word philosophy, has a historical usage and has a contemporary usage that developed. That historical usage is still significant in the sense that when we refer to falsafa within Islamic circles in the Islamic tradition, we mean a specific sect. So clearly, when we're saying philosophers in contemporary settings, we don't mean those sects that hold to necessarily kufri beliefs. Now, whether Ibn Taymiyyah is a philosopher or not, you were asking before I left, and I told you that Sheikh Maher Amin had a discussion right in front of me, and it's recorded if you want it, where this was the point. He was like, well, look, it depends on what you mean. If you mean that somebody who uses reason, evidence to infer conclusions, who organizes thought in a logical way, then that's a philosopher. Then a lot of us engage in philosophy. Somebody who does that as a specialty, or who is more, engaged in it as an expert. Well, yeah, okay, you can call him a philosopher. The point is the ma'na that's fasid from the word. We're not going to take that and apply it to him. But of course, we don't have to disagree. If you want to say that by philosophy you mean people who hold to such and such beliefs, then okay, fine. Yeah, no philosopher is a Muslim, but that's just trivial. That's the point. The point is you want people to understand what you're saying. People today, generally speaking, at least in the West, of course, they don't use the term philosopher in the way that you're restricting it within an Islamic traditional sense, right? And Istilah has developed throughout Islamic history. I mean, the Salaf themselves were wrong by your lights if any kind of evolution in Istilah is prohibited. You yourself are wrong. You're expressing yourself in a specific language right now that's not explicitly Quranic, not word for word Quranic. Now, the point is, where do you draw the line? What's appropriate, what's not appropriate? There we say it's about the substance, the meaning. Now, can I express an argument in a way better than the Quranic verse? Of course not. No, I can't. Can I prove the existence of God? You see, the problem is when you're being uncharitable towards those you're critiquing, even amongst the Ash'ari, you think that Ash'ari think that they can express an argument for God's existence better than Allah can? That would be straight kufr. I mean, why are you assuming this about your brothers? Husn al-dhann, and you're saying that right now philosophical language, so you're using it to look smart. Well, you can use religious language and shari language to try and look smart, which is even more dangerous. But then I wouldn't say that about you because I want to have husn al-dhann of you. This very reductive, shallow approach, I think, is dangerous for the awam if your concern is the awam. He's on this very narrow outlook on something that's very expansive, and something that is quite significant these days. We need to have an educated take on it, not this very simplistic, rhetoric that we use in order to back one position or another. No, worry about the substance. And look at what the people are saying and what it implies, and then judge whether it's right or wrong. The label is only there. The bid'i label is only there because of the substance. If the substance changes, the substance is not bid'i. That's the whole point. So sticking to this istilah and appealing to traditional usages of specific terms in order to make your point is really not helpful. And I think clearly, I think from this discussion, it's been quite reasonably established what Ibn Taymiyyah's take on these matters are, and what his approach to it is, and how he takes a more comprehensive look on it, and how Ahl Sunnah in general are fair in their assessment of other people, and they don't just
Abdulrahman.
generalize in everything like that. Thank you.
Abdulrahman.
That's my last comment. I'm
Samir.
gonna listen to you, and then I'm
One
gonna
question,
leave.
Abdulrahman. One question.
Samir.
Let me just say, because I need to say salam. I'm not gonna be able to respond, so I'm gonna listen to what you have to say, then leave. Salam alaikum.
Well, I have a question, Abdulrahman, if you don't mind. Just only one question.
Just another thing too, Abdulrahman, real quick, Abdulrahman, inshallah, tomorrow they say they're going to make another room, so inshallah you can have a longer discussion in more detail than if you're in a rush.
Well, I was planning to ask him like the Ash'ari, like okay, no problem. Inshallah tomorrow we meet. Samir, can you just
I was going to ask brother Abdulrahman a question, because he said it's the substance, it's not the alfaz. يعني لا مشاحة في الاصطلاح. It's only a difference of wordings, terms, terminology, but the essence or the substance within is inshallah solid, it's good, it's legit. And that's why if anybody remembers, I asked which argument from the Kalami arguments is from the Kitab and Sunnah. And the example given was the contingency argument. And the evidence for that, obviously, there was no evidence. But Abdulrahman, he said that.
Okay, I didn't say that. I'm sorry. Before you go on and on, I didn't say that. The Salah part wasn't related to arguments, brother. And the contingency argument wasn't a response to your question of what's from the Quran and Sunnah. But I, in fact, read verbatim from Ibn Taymiyyah, him saying that the meaning of the contingency argument and its conclusion of a necessary being is ma'na sahih. So, look, if you're disagreeing with him and me, I mean, like, if you can disagree with him, he's not a prophet. But then he does provide his reasoning.
It's very simple. Did he say necessary existence, or did he say Allah?
I read it out for you. You want me to make it my script?
I'm gonna accept it. Now, is wajib al-wujud Allah?
Brother, look, so let me answer that. I read a quote by Ibn al-Qayyim earlier, if you remember. Do you want me to reread it?
Ibn al-Qayyim is referring. Okay, I remember that. Ibn al-Qayyim is referring.
Remember the difference between bab al-ikhbar anhu wa bab al-asma'i wa sifat? Do you remember the difference between those two? One is tawqifi and the other is not. Nobody's saying necessary being has become among the asma' sifat that's tawqifi.
Abdulrahman. Let's see if you understand this. If I want to refer to Allah Azza wa Jal using the word ba'd or juz', is that okay?
What do you mean? I need a context. Look, so I don't know what you mean by referring.
يد الله.
Allah is a ba'd. Of
Okay,
course you can't say
okay.
that.
يد الله بعض من الله. This statement, is it
No,
correct?
no.
Why?
No, I would not say that in any context for several reasons. First of all, if you mean it as like if you mean it in a sense that it's
Abdulrahman,
it is
you
what
never
the sifa
asked
is.
me. You never asked me what I meant. You
Okay.
said no. You dismissed it.
Do you know what Ibn Taymiyyah's theory of language and meaning is? It's contextualism. Basically, if you ask him, he's going to ask what you mean by it. He's not going to. So
Okay.
if you saying something, a sentence,
In any context,
just in a vacuum, has
طيب,
okay, give me a context.
Abdulrahman, in any context, referring to Allah Azza wa Jal using بعض or جزء, is it okay? In any context.
So if you mean that the yad is بعض in the sense that Allah يوصف باليد وبالعلم وبالقدرة, then and this completes that, as in it's a complete logical picture where there are logical parts, then that's just a way of expressing that Allah has several sifat. Yeah, so here there's no problem with the meaning. As in, or do you deny?
So
do you deny
essentially, don't worry. Essentially, you're saying that there's no problem using بعض or جزء in وصف الله Azza wa Jal.
No, I'm essentially saying it depends on what you mean, and there are particular contexts where the meaning is not problematic, because basically you would be meaning that Allah has these multiple attributes. Allah is His essence and attributes, and He has these multiple attributes. If you mean that, then you tell me if it's a problem. If you're saying that we can only use words from the Quran, tell me why you're speaking English. If you're saying that it's only okay for translation, then you tell me where we draw the line. Because right now you're not just translating the words of the Quran, you're also expressing your opinion about the meanings of the Quran and Shara'i positions using language that's not Quranic. So you tell me where you're going to draw the line, because it seems like what your line of reasoning here with the questioning is that I should only quote the Quran verbatim and that's it. But that's just not what you're doing either.
طيب. All I'm establishing is you're not able to give a clear answer. If you ask anybody who's a Salafi, he will say no. Under no circumstances can you use these words concerning Allah Azza wa Jal. You cannot use them.
No, they will ask you, what do you mean by the word? They will.
No,
I said,
Abdulrahman,
you want me to give you a quote?
you gave your answer.
Do you want a quotation? Do you want a quotation from a
طيب.
scholar?
Yeah, no problem. Is it
Under no
okay
circumstances.
or is it not okay? That's my question to you.
So here,
In any
let Ibn
context.
al-Qayyim answer. Maybe he knows better than me. ما يطلق عليه في باب الأسماء والصفات توقيفي. What is expressed of him in terms of أسماء and صفات must be verbatim from the Quran and Sunnah. توقيفي. وما يطلق عليه من الإخبار لا يجب أن يكون توقيفيا. And what is expressed about him or predicated of him in terms of informed about him doesn't.
Very simple.
So
this is Ibn al-Qayyim, yeah?
Yeah. It's Ibn al-Qayyim.
تمام. Does Ibn al-Qayyim refer to Allah Azza wa Jal using بعض or جزء?
So right now here, so right now, does the Prophet refer to Allah using wajib al-wujud? No. So why would Ibn Taymiyyah do that? So the point is, you can stick to your criteria, but then you just need to go back to the Prophet. Don't appeal to the scholars of Ahl Sunnah as authorities, because they use terms. Allah mawjud. Did the Prophet say Allah mawjud? No. Ibn al-Qayyim said it. It's okay for you to hold to your criteria, but be consistent. And right now, you're not just against me, you're against me, you're against Ibn al-Qayyim, against Taymiyyah, and Sunnah in general.
Abdulrahman, if you remember earlier, I asked you which kitab Aqidah did Ibn Taymiyyah use these things. In which book of his Kutub al-Aqidah did he say Allah is wajib al-wujud?
Yeah, we already discussed that, and I said I agree with you that okay, this is not to be expressed of Allah in a sense that it is amongst His asma and sifat. That's why it's not the foundation of Aqidah. But can you use in ordinary language these words to inform of Him if the meaning is correct? Yes. If you disagree with Ahl Sunnah. That's fine, not with me. Right? So that's just the point I make. Anyway, thank you. I have to leave. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.